12 words ended a candidate's lead in 48 hours. October 2000, Frank Luntz handed the Bush campaign a single-page memo. Inside it, a revised vocabulary of 11 policy terms and one phrase. Polling numbers shifted before a single ad was purchased. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how a specific language architecture was used by political operatives to restructure voter perception at the neurological level, and why the same framework is running inside every major campaign today. The pattern did not stop in 2000. Most people believe elections are decided by policy positions, by debate performances, by the economy. That is the surface explanation, and the surface explanation is almost always wrong. In 1994, Republican strategist Frank Luntz distributed a document to congressional candidates titled Language, a Key Mechanism of Control. The document was not about what to say. It was about which specific words activated specific emotional responses in the brain before rational analysis could begin. The document listed 64 words. Positive words like opportunity, children, freedom, dream. Negative words like bureaucracy, rule, radical, waste. Candidates were instructed to use the positive list when describing themselves, the negative list when describing opponents. This was not rhetoric. This was behavioral architecture applied to democratic systems. The specific terms were not chosen by intuition. They were chosen through focus group testing, a process of iterative refinement that Luntz had been developing since his doctoral research at Oxford. He was measuring not what people thought about a word. He was measuring what they felt before thinking occurred. The mechanism he was mapping had a name in academic literature: semantic priming. The activation of one concept in the brain increases the accessibility of related concepts without the subject's awareness. A voter who hears the phrase tax relief has already processed taxation as a burden requiring rescue before any policy detail is presented. Luntz called this process finding the right language. In the literature of cognitive linguistics, it is called framing. In the architecture of institutional influence, it is something more precise than either term suggests. It is the design of the decision before the decision is made. To understand what happened in 2000, you need to understand where this technology actually comes from. The idea that specific words can bypass rational thought and activate emotional states is not a modern political invention. It is a documented behavioral template with a traceable institutional history. In the early 20th century, Walter Lippmann, journalist, political theorist, advisor to 4 American presidents, published a book called Public Opinion in 1922. In it, he described what he called the picture in our heads, the internal representation of reality that each person uses to navigate a world they cannot directly perceive. Lippmann's argument was clinical and disturbing. The pictures in people's heads are not formed by direct experience. They are formed by the symbols, language, and imagery delivered through media systems. Whoever controls the symbols controls the picture. But Lippmann was not working in isolation. He had collaborated during World War I with Edward Bernays, the man who would later write Propaganda in 1928, and is documented as the architect of modern public relations. Bernays was Sigmund Freud's nephew. He applied Freudian theories of unconscious motivation to therapy, but to the mass management of public behavior. His clients included corporations, governments, and the United States military. The framework Bernays systematized was simple. Identify the underlying emotional need. Attach a symbol to that need. Deliver the symbol through trusted institutional channels. Behavior follows without coercion. This is not a theory. These are documented historical parallels with traceable institutional lineage. If you have encountered this cognitive framework in your professional environment, in corporate communication, in product design, in political messaging, describe the specific context in the comments. We are mapping how far this institutional pattern currently reaches. Now return to 2000. Frank Luntz did not invent a new system. He refined and operationalized a behavioral template that had been under institutional development for 80 years. His specific contribution was precision. He moved from broad emotional categories to word-level granularity. He was not asking what theme activates fear. He was asking which specific word in which specific sentence position produces the fastest emotional response, with the least rational resistance. The 12 words he delivered to the Bush campaign in October 2000 were a refinement of this precision. The phrase was not a slogan. It was a cognitive switch, a sequence designed to reframe the central debate of the election at the level of emotional architecture before any counter-argument could be formed. Actually, it is worse than that. The phrase was not new. It had been tested in 15 focus groups across 6 states over 3 months. By the time it reached the campaign, its emotional pathway was already mapped. The candidate was not delivering a message. He was activating a pre-built perceptual structure in the voter's mind. The lead shifted in 48 hours. Here is where the analysis becomes uncomfortable. The framework Luntz applied in 2000 did not remain inside political consulting. It was adopted systematically and deliberately by the behavioral architecture teams of major technology companies. Wait, look at the structure again. In 2014, internal documents from Facebook's data science team, later published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, described an experiment conducted on 689,003 users without explicit disclosure. The researchers systematically altered the emotional content of posts appearing in user feeds. They were not testing whether users noticed the change. They were testing whether emotional state could be transferred through language exposure without the subject's awareness or consent. The results were affirmative. Users exposed to more positive language produced more positive content. Users exposed to more negative language produced more negative content. The emotional state was not self-generated. It was architecturally delivered. That is not a design choice. It is a behavioral decision. The same year, Twitter, now X, filed a patent for a system described as resonance, a content ranking algorithm that prioritizes posts based on predicted emotional activation rather than chronological order or social proximity. The patent documentation specifically references emotional contagion research, the infrastructure that Luntz was building manually through focus groups in 1994, identifying emotional triggers, testing word-level precision, deploying at scale through trusted channels, is now automated, operating in real time, on billions of interactions per day. The pattern does not stop there. In 2023, the Federal Trade Commission opened an investigation into the behavioral targeting practices of 6 major technology platforms. The internal communications released during the investigation included product development memos that used the term persuasion architecture not as an external critique, but as an internal design category. This is the vocabulary of the people building the system, describing what they are building. Persuasion architecture. The phrase Bernays was approximating in 1928. The framework Luntz was operationalizing in 1994. Now, line item in a product roadmap. If this investigation is worth continuing, if independent analysis of documented institutional patterns is something you want to see mapped further, signal it. The algorithm reads that as a direct vote for this kind of work. The critical question is not whether these systems exist. The documentation is public. The question is what changes when you can see the architecture. Here is the lens. Next time you encounter a policy debate on television, in your feed, in a conversation, do not ask yourself, do I agree or disagree? Ask a different question. What emotional state am I in right now? And what specific word or image delivered me into it? You are not looking for the argument. You are looking for the frame that made the argument feel inevitable before it was presented. That is the difference between consuming a message and observing its delivery mechanism. This is not a claim about manipulation as a universal experience. It is a claim about architecture. The architecture exists whether you observe it or not. Observation does not neutralize it, but it does change your relationship to it. The 12 words that shifted the 2000 race are not historically significant because they worked. Thousands of language tests work. They are significant because of what their effectiveness documented, that a democratic decision made by millions of autonomous individuals can be structurally influenced at the word level, weeks before the vote, through a system built in private and delivered through public channels. That system is older than Luntz. It is older than Bernays. It is older than Lippmann. The next layer of this investigation maps exactly which institutional frameworks carried this technology from early 20th century behavioral research into the product teams of modern AI companies, and who documented the transfer. Subscribe to follow the analysis as it develops. The mechanism has never required secrecy to function. It only requires that most people continue to believe elections are decided by policy positions, by debate performances, by the economy. The question is not whether the frame exists. The question is, who designed the frame you are inside right now?